Hey guys, welcome back to Tiffany's TVscape. Today I have a special guest with me. I have filmmaker and writer Eric Nazarian here with me today. He's going to be talking about his film Die Like a Man, which is going to be hitting theaters soon, and it also will be available for digital release at the end of this month. Eric, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks for having me on your lovely podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. We had a hectic start, y'all, but we're here and we're going to do it good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I got a chance to view your film and I thought it was wonderful. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I definitely just wanted to jump in and find out where the idea for this film came from because it seemed really personal. So I definitely wanted to know if it was inspired by true events.
Right, right. Thank you so much. Very good question. I think ultimately, as artists, you're always taken by events in your life that are also mixed with your imagination and your imaginarium and your heart and your soul. So, Die Like a Man, really, I think the embryo of the story was built in the 80s and 90s in LA when I grew up as an immigrant, as an Armenian immigrant, in a very, very multi-ethnic city that was going through some severe growing pains at the time. And unfortunately, it was a period where, there was a lot of violence in the streets. And it was a time, of the Cold War, and it was a time of gang violence and gun violence. And, you know, fortunately, I come from a very literate family, and we came as refugees to this country when I was 4. So I grew up in public school system, and I grew up with Mexican kids, African American, Guatemalan, Haitian, Cuban, Vietnamese. So we had a real beautiful upbringing in the 80s. And then right around 88, 89, unfortunately, when I think crack cocaine hit and all this, the post Cold War immigration and everything, unfortunately, the situation got really dicey in the streets. And I stuck to school and to art and films thanks to my beloved father and my family. But I saw a lot of my friends get really badly hurt. A lot of people that, unfortunately, this is a pandemic for the world. It's not just LA, it's Chicago, it's New York, it's Philly, it's Mexico City, it's Rio de Janeiro. We just saw a lot of really bad blood. And I just grew up always wondering, why was it that, young boys, as we were becoming men, so-called men, we were always expected to prove ourselves through violence. And that really bothered me as a young man, as a teen, as an adolescent. I just couldn't understand why I had to be constantly forced to prove myself through my fists. Or unfortunately, then the fists went into guns and it just became chaos. So a lot of guys I knew who were beautiful people, who had nothing to do with this world, were just caught in the crossfires. And that kind of became my battle cry writing this film and directing it many years later, is I wanted to just tell a story of the mindset, not the trigger finger, the mindset of why are we teaching, young boys, in order to graduate to become so-called men, have to shed blood. Now, whether that's in the military, whether that's in the Taliban, whether that's a biker gang, whether it's Wall Street, the theme is the same. It's like
Right.
the more you conquer, the more of respect you get. And I despise that mentality. So this was really kind of my, kind of a painful love letter to adolescence and to kind of, Freddie's story. He's a young deer who thinks he's a wolf, and he learns a very terrible lesson about self-deception. And ultimately, I wanted to make a film that could be a cautionary tale to other kids, that can hopefully be an inspiring one, about guns and about, making decisions, and about, unfortunately, friends who become brothers, who become strangers. And then the moment you show emotion, you end up basically being considered as weak. And I think these are all ingrained reflexes in our, patriarchal societies that need to change. And so this film is kind of like it's a warning shot against the area we're entering now in this country, especially now with gun violence. I mean, we're at a very critical point of no return. And unfortunately, we don't have the leadership that we need to be able to switch that around. So people have to start with themselves.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And I'm glad that you touched on gun violence because I did want to talk about that topic and I'm going to come back to that. But I did just want to highlight that the cast is really wonderful. What was the casting process like? And when did you kind of know, like, I got it. This is great.
Yeah, the casting is the most difficult, the most important, and the one process that I just put 199% in, because if you don't cast it correctly, like Alfred Hitchcock said, casting is 50% of your movie. Um, I think it was really, for me, I come from my father, rest in peace, Hayek, was a filmmaker in the Soviet Union. So he taught me a lot about film and drama and casting. And the two areas he really made me focus on when I was very young was screenwriting, literature, and photography and acting for drama. And so these four areas were like kind of like my backbone as, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old learning to write scripts. And casting really for me was not about just finding an actor who can play it well, but it was like how to find the actor that's going to give their life into this. Because I don't think that representation of a character on screen is enough. You have to embody that character, and for that you need a lot of time. And for time and effort, I think you need actors that are willing to jump off the cliff with you every day and grow wings on the way down. And it was a very granular process. I didn't want to cast the film with names. I didn't want the film's message to be hijacked by this whole so-called star system, which is irrelevant to me now as a filmmaker, because I wanted to make a film that I could go into the streets, cast from the streets, be independent, and not have to be beholden to whatever actor, has market value or not. Like, none of that mattered to me. I wanted to give a voice and a chance to inner city kids to be able to train them and use filmmaking as a deterrent to gun violence. And we'll get into that as well. But for Miguel, it was a very intense process of casting. He was on a film that one of my producing partners was on. And we basically had a conversation. And I didn't want to look at his reel. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to meet him as a person and see if we had that vibe, we had that trust. Because everything about life that works happens when there's real trust, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a business, whether it's a political summit, whether it's a film. Trust is everything for me. If I can't trust the person and they can't trust me, then it's over. Not going to work. Yeah. And so Miguel was just so all in. I mean, he was in the Dominican Republic. I remember he did a reading of the scene on the script, just like in the bathroom, because he was like, he wanted to really prove that he had this incredible passion. But I could just see, like, this kid was it, man. He had such discipline, such sensitivity, such honesty. And with that came this incredible sense of responsibility that I need to get this right. So we spent about 6 months going to the streets, talking to, the old gangsters, going into Homeboy Industries. Father Greg Boyle, who's a dear friend for many, many years, and has been a phenomenal help to me in my first film, The Blue Hour, that I shot in East LA, Boyle Heights, in 2006. And we went to Homeboy Industries because it's the biggest, largest gang intervention organization in the world. And they do miracles. They've helped change thousands of people's lives by giving them jobs, training. And so Homeboy was really important to me to have that blessing, like to have Miguel hang out there, talk to the leadership, hang out with the homies, talk about the whole world. But I was very adamant that this film is not a gang film. This film is about a rite of passage. There's many gang films done. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested more in mentors and disciples. Mentors and disciples are the most important, I think, the backbone of this film. And I think to Miguel's counterpart, Corey Hardrick, came in like a monumental kind of rock, a mountain. I was such a huge fan of his work that he had done with Clint Eastwood and his other work in the, about 10, 15 years. And I was just like, he was always on my radar. So when my wonderful producing partner, Tommy Oliver, suggested that we meet, I was like over the moon. And again, with Corey, it was the same thing with Miguel. The moment he sat down, I knew I had solo. And it was about trust and love and giving my actors all the freedom that they could so that they can carve the character in a very honest and open and beautiful way. And then from that, through Miguel, I met Marielle, that they had worked with on a TV pilot and a TV series. And then she had this incredible chemistry with Freddie, with Miguel. And I just saw the wings of this film taking off. And then I wanted to use film as a deterrent to gun violence. And so I started casting a lot of kids and guys and men, women, children from Homeboy. And then eventually with Berenice Molina Valle and with Sergio Alejandro Lopez De Niro and Alex Gibson and David Martinez, David McGill, there was a group called The Streets from the Set. And my friend Omar, my mentee, introduced us, and they were helping me cast the movie. And then when Berenice read the script, she told me that this film mirrored her own life and that she was struggling with her son, who was at a very large risk both gangs and gun violence. So we talked, and then I realized this was the chance to really give someone a chance to really put their heart and soul into the role. And so we trained, and we were supposed to shoot this film right when COVID started. So we collapsed, we lost everything. I had to rebuild everything, and we shot it the following year, and just been really handcrafting it. I will say this is a film that's built like a custom lowrider, like a custom bike. It's not a factory made movie. It's all handmade. Every single frame I handmade. We shot in LA, edited it in Mexico, and finished it in Warsaw, Poland. So I'm just very blessed to have an international community with me.
Wow. Yeah, it definitely sounds like everything happened the way it was supposed to. And I think having that extra preparation and, like you said, just going out in the streets and talking to people, like that really paid off, I think.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely.
And so, yeah, let's go back to what you were talking about earlier. Some of the themes that the film touches on. And I think the most prominent one that for me was the gun violence. What are you hoping that the audience gets from this story? And like you even mentioned, even in today's like political climate and the way the country is going, what are you kind of hoping that people get out of the story?
I'm hoping that they can really take a look at themselves, but also I'll just give you one story that I feel before even the film was done. I think I was just about to lock picture, finalizing editing. We did a very small private screening for parents that had lost kids to gun violence, gang violence, and it was a very emotional screening, very painful. I could just feel the tension in the room, before the screening. And when the lights came up, again, they were very emotional. And this one mom was incredibly, like, I'll never forget this for the rest of my life. She had just lost her son about, like, I think 7 or 8 months before. And she just, came up to me, gave me a hug, and said, I wish the boy that had murdered my son had seen your film the night before. Maybe he would have changed his mind. And to me, that was the most eviscerating, the most important comment that I think I'll ever receive. And I know that and once you finish a film, it's no longer yours. It's mine for life because it's my DNA and my soul and my everything into it. But I knew that night I gave that film to that lovely mom, and who will be struggling for the rest of her life with this loss. But the thing that made me really cry was the word maybe. The fact that she felt like this film had a chance to change the paradigm. And that's the hope for, I think, for me as a filmmaker. That's probably the thing that I hope that my work can do at its highest context is wake somebody up, inspire them, or maybe just be a cautionary tale that will be an inspiring one. Because as you've seen the film, it's about regret, and about regret being a road to conscience, and about awakening. And so, my hope is that people will watch this film, those who are at risk, and they can see that, there is no honor, there is no glory in hurting another human being.
Mm-hmm.
There is none of that. All this, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the military, whether it's gangs.
Yeah.
Anytime you hurt innocent people who are just trying to make a living, trying to just survive,
Mm-hmm.
and I think for Freddie's story, I want people to understand that. And the moral of the story is, I think Freddie's journey is, Freddie is a much better person than his worst decisions.
Yeah.
That we shouldn't give up on Freddie. Like, we are better than our worst decisions as a species. And I think in our current times right now, where everything's a permanent delete, or it's a scroll, or it's an 8 second, attention span, where we're losing our humanity. And I want to stop. I want to slow things down and have you watch this film to really embrace the journey of this boy, the journey of his mom, the journey of his girlfriend, the journey of a community that is struggling with this embedded codes of violence, that it doesn't matter if it's Freddie or if somebody's dropping a bomb now somewhere in another part of the world, ultimately ends up being about the delusion that if you have power and you have a gun, then that means you can do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that comment gave me chills. I can't imagine somebody saying that to me and knowing that, something that you made could have such an impact on people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just proof enough how powerful film can be. And so, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's still very emotional for me because I wasn't ready for it. I was very nervous. I just didn't know what to expect. So you put your heart and soul into something for, 10, 15 years. You have all these false starts. You get hammered, you get destroyed. you have so much of life come and kick you in the ass, and you're like, wow, like, but I'm still going, and I'm still gonna struggle, and I'm still gonna go because there's this thing inside you, and that's the thing that you can't quantify. I think, unfortunately, movies now that have become such soulless things on the streaming channels, you look at any given streamer, and there's all these different types of films that are just fabricated and caramelized, and they all look the same, they all sound the same, they're all fake. And I was like, I just want to give a chance to my film, to my film community, to my actors, to talk about the soul, and spiritual. The spiritual aspect of a film to me is the most important thing. That's why we keep watching, these great films from the 90s and 80s and 70s, because we want to be moved, we want to have catharsis, we want to feel like we're not alone. And I think, and I'm hoping that this film will do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you talked a little bit about Homeboy Industries and you
Mhm.
partner with other advocacy groups. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that, like how those collaborations came about?
Absolutely, very good question. And this is part of like my mission as a filmmaker, because I think Die Like a Man for me was a pilot project that started, and tentatively it was called ICC, which is like integrating cinema communities. And so there's like four aspects, that four corners I call it, which is ironic because we shot in the four corners of Venice, Santa Monica, Culver City, and Sawtell. And basically, it's social change through filmmaking, film literacy, by bridging academia and activism. And I love academia, and I went to USC Film School. It's an area of, like, as a researcher, as someone who researches very heavily on things I do, like, I feel like academia is not incorporated enough into films in order to create educational tools as well as activism. So what I wanted to do was make this film so independently, so that I didn't have to be beholden to some soulless corporate bureaucrats who were going to tell me what I was going to do with this movie. We partnered with a company that's going to sell the VOD, and that's has its own issues, has its own challenges, because ultimately this film is about community. So I wanted to self-release the film theatrically, to bring communities together and to be free to give this film to social impact groups that can use it as an educational tool, that can help with their fundraising. And so I partnered with Pico Youth and Family Center, my friend Oscar de la Torre, who's an executive producer. It was a dear friend that's I've known for well over 20 years. And they're kind of like the Homeboy Industries of the West Side in Santa Monica. And so they're doing amazing things, building labs and, creating, cross-cultural community and union, and having these amazing events. But the whole point was, let's cast indigenously, let's pay into the local economy, let's not buy, from Costco and all these like, let's just, whatever we can do to like help support the local economy, mom and pop shops. Like, this is all part of that vision that I have for ICC, which is essentially activism by partnering with nonprofit groups like Homeboy, like PYFC, and also like with Everytown for Gun Safety Support Fund. I connected with a wonderful cultural advocacy member there, Tukio Makini, who's one of my associate producers. And we just talked about ways that we can use this film in order to raise awareness. So the idea is, as much as I can with all my other films, I try to build this type of educational program in that can help support the communities we shoot in, as well as bridge in higher learning and academia to bridge that with film. Because all my favorite filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick and Martin Scorsese, they really, 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 had a respect for research and academia and creating film as an institution that bridges everything else together.
Yeah, I love that answer. And then speaking of past films, I know you kind of talked a little bit about how, we constantly kind of go back to films in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that. I read that the first film you ever saw was E.T.
Yes, yes. E.T. changed. I was just talking about this yesterday with a dear friend of mine. So, as former Soviet refugees in America, my father's dream, kind of like the Langston Hughes poem, was like a dream deferred, right? The Raisin in the Sun poem. Like, he had all this vision and he was so ahead of his time, but they were very cautious of him because he represented everything that the Soviets disliked, which is freedom of expression. He wore his hair long, and he was just a real rebel. So that dream was deferred. And when we came to America as immigrants, he worked very hard to provide for his family. And, the one day that he had off, we would go and rent a VCR and watch these old movies. But the first movie that was an event was E.T. at the Man Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And I was like 7, it's like 6.5, 7 years old at the time. And that movie, going in and watching this young boy on a bike with this alien, and then they just defy gravity. That film, when I was a child, taught me that I could grow wings. That's what Steven Spielberg gave me, because he is our Hans Christian Andersen. He gave us this passion for imagination. And then when I was a teen, struggling with, my parents had been divorced, and I was rewatching these movies. Then that film in my teens became about a single mom raising her 2 sons, right? And then as an adult, when I watched it, I was like, this is the first film of its kind to take the role of the alien and to humanize the other. In other words, up until E.T., all these alien movies were like scary predators, right, coming to kill you. But E.T. was like, he was bringing the other. Sorry, there's like some. It's L.A., so there's some
That's
action.
okay. All
We're
the
at the
time.
Writers Guild, but so this one film throughout my whole life has meant 3 different things to me. And that's the power of cinema, right?
Yeah.
It's like it grows with you. It becomes like Godfather to me is not about the mafia. Like that's secondary. It's about a man very, very nervous about losing his family and what he has to do to preserve that. So, these are deeper questions. And I think, E.T. really to me, like it's healing for me. Like whenever I'm going through something in life, I always go back to that film because that film nourishes me and it nourishes my soul.
I actually wanted to share with you that I went to a convention, a horror movie convention, last year in Las Vegas. I was living in Vegas at the time, and I met Dee Wallace, and I had her sign an ET poster.
Oh,
Uh,
that's
yeah, so I thought that would be kind of nice to share since you said that.
absolutely. Wow.
And she was
Wow.
very sweet too, and I had a quick conversation with her, and I told her that the movie Critters scared me so much as a kid, and she laughed about it, and she was like, "Oh, that was a fun movie. That was a funny movie." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, like that movie really scared me as a
Yeah.
kid."
Gremlins used to scare me as a kid, because
Oh
like you
really?
remember the little punk mohawk gremlin and
Yeah.
all that was Gremlin and Alien, but
Uh-huh.
that was the first time where E.T. was like, see, that's the genius of Steven Spielberg, as he's such a humanist. He can take anything and turn it into humanity. And you're not realizing this. You're thinking you're watching a science fiction film. I mean, the dumbest thing I did probably in my pre-teens, pre-adolescence was after ET. I thought I was gonna jump off the LA River on my BMX, and I wanted to bust the ET move, right, to
Oh,
defy gravity, and I just came crashing down. I nearly broke my arm. Disasters.
oh.
Yeah.
Oh, and so, well, speaking about old films, I did kind of want to ask you, is there any series or film or filmmakers that are currently, making work right now that you feel like is really inspiring or moving for you? Because I know we talk a lot about, past films and things that affected us when we were younger, but I'm wondering if there's anything today that's being made that you feel like could really maybe stand the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's some incredible filmmakers. I mean, I love the work of Barry Jenkins. I think Moonlight, I felt, was such a kindred to my own journey making Die Like a Man, because it took about 14 years. And I felt like the sensitivity, the passion, the beauty of the poetry, incorporating this very personal, poetic, structure of this young man's life, was, I think, very, very profound. I love Steve McQueen, the West Indies filmmaker from England. Hunger was a film. I mean, it's like a black filmmaker making the best film about the Irish Troubles, Bobby Sands' journey. I mean, that's the power of cinema that transcends language, that transcends border, that transcends it all. I think these are really, really, really important filmmakers to me. I love obviously what Alfonso Cuarón did with Roma. It was a beautiful film about his youth in Mexico. Obviously the Three Amigos, Alejandro González Iñárritu, Guillermo del Toro. These are like real, real, real powerful, powerful films. I love what Dee Reese did with Mudbound and her film Pariah. I mean, there's just so many filmmakers like I'm fond of. I think, this new film that my wife and I just can't stop talking about, Adolescence on Netflix. I mean, it's a series of 4 hours, but it's like a 4 hour movie. I mean, it's just so mind blowingly brilliant because it's so honest and authentic. And so that gives me hope that you can actually make films and land on those platforms without having to compromise. I think
Right.
There are so many, and then, you know, unfortunately, John Singleton was a teacher at USC when I was a student, and he would let me audit his class because it was like a grad class, and we became friends. And unfortunately, he passed away. But that was always the thing, right? It was like he would come back to school because he was so fed up with the system, and he'd be like, "You got to do your own shit. You got to go with, you know, you got to go with, you got to do what's in your heart." You got, and he was echoing the same thing my father would say, which was like basically stick to your guns, and you know. And so I think great films live because they are outside of the box. There are exceptions to the rule, right? Even like when you look at the Beatles' Hey Jude, or when you look at anything that you watch, any movie that like Forrest Gump, you know, all these great films, all these great songs that we're grown up with, Aretha Franklin, Sam Cooke, any artist that you look at, you know, their best work is the work that they fought so hard to get made because it was against the commercialism. And
Yeah.
those are the works that end up living. I mean, The Godfather Part One and Part Two. You know, it's like the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's so many great, great, great movies that I think for me all exist. All the great works exist because they're exceptions to the rule. So therefore, the rule is broken. So don't listen to what the algorithm says. Don't listen to what these, you know, and there's some great executives, but a majority of them are idiots because they just don't know how to nurture an idea based
Yeah.
on what the artist wants. They're saying, no, the algorithm says this. And I've had this experience before. It's just ridiculous. So I think now, because the democratization of technology, we have so much we can do. We have so much we can create. I mean, my friend Sean Baker, you know, he's a brilliant filmmaker. You know, he did Tangerine on an iPhone. Then he did Red Rocket. Then he did Honora, right? I mean, and look what Honora did. You know, it swept up the Academy Awards. So that's an underdog film that's 2 hours and 40 minutes. It does everything that people tell you not to do. And he did it brilliantly, and he gave people a chance to be in the limelight that never would have had that chance had he not done it. So kudos to him.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I love that you just dropped that you worked with John Singleton so casually. Like I'm like, wow, I'm still stuck on that.
He was, I mean, it's so sad. I was heartbroken. 2019 was the year we were planning to shoot the film. It collapsed, and then he passed away, and I
Wow.
was in touch with his mom via email. But it was just over the years, you know. I mean, there was this guy who had like a John Huston book in his arm, and I was like, hey, I have that book. And he was like, yeah, man, what are you doing? What's your story? And I'm like, hey, can I take your class? He goes, yeah, just sign up for it. And they wouldn't let me sign up for it because it was a grad class. Then I said, bro, can you like write a recommendation? He's like, forget that. Just come into my class, man. Just like, don't
Wow.
even. So I was like, cool. He's like, yeah, that's what I did. He was like, I did at I just came and I just sat in. So I was like, dope.
Uh, Such a cool experience. I'm glad that you had that. And I know you talked about it took, such a long time to make this film and for everything to come together. So what would you say is the most memorable experience making this film? And if there's a lesson or something that you feel like you took that you'll take with you to the next project.
Yeah. I think the most memorable experience is the actual looking back on. It's kind of like you're like a wedding day or like a baptism, right? You're going through and it passes so fast. And then for the rest of your life, there's all these flashbulb memories, right? I mean, one memory I won't forget, which was very haunting, was there's a scene where the character of Boxer, no spoilers, has a moment, and he's talking about what they did in the 90s and what happened, and he's just kind of talking about a time in LA that's gone now. It's gone. It's buried under the gentrification. It's over. And as we were shooting that scene in this alley garage in Venice, California, the gentleman that we rented the property from to shoot the scene, is a very nice man. Brought his son out. He was just very happy that a film was being shot in the backyard. And he's, as Cesar Garcia, the actor who plays Boxer, is reciting this monologue. As we were shooting, I keep hearing this sniffing sound. And I was like, Jesus Christ, who the hell is that? When you're shooting a film in 13, 14 days, you have no margin for error. You get very, very angry when there's one note, right? So I looked around and be like, where the hell is this sniffing sound come from? And it was the owner of the house, Jose, big, tall guy, right? And he's standing there listening to this and he's crying. And I just looked at him, and Caesar finished the scene. And after I yelled cut, I said, bro, are you okay? He's like, Eric, what he's saying is from my life. It's exactly what happened to me 30 years ago, 2 blocks away. And so that osmosis of like, what? Like, you think you're doing something that's from your imagination, but it actually exists in the ether of people's souls. And I'll never forget that moment. That was a very, very intense moment. Yeah. And I think ultimately I would want people to take away from this story, the most important thing in your life is not what you make, what you can put on a line item, what you can budget, what you think you should be at a certain age, how society's telling you, hey, you're running out of time. Like the most important thing in life is to define what makes you as a human being through your dreams. What do you want to be best at? And how can you get better every day, just a millimeter? You know, that if you've done that every day, you've defeated that day. That day is yours forever. And so I think with this film, you know, we got killed in COVID. You know, we 4 months of work down the drain, even though it was paused. Had to wait a year. You know, start, you know, again, sophisticatedly begging for money again, and then having wonderful people, you know, the Sam Scripps and Wellen Scripps and Kylo Freeman, you know, our EPs, who basically said, look, we believe in you, and it was at the height of COVID, right? And then doing everything, you know, shoestring. And then you realize, wow, you survive COVID, you shoot it in COVID, you edit it through the surge, you know, all these people dying, you can't even focus on anything. And then the strikes happened, you know, the WJ strikes and SAG strikes. So it was like all in. I'm a hardcore union guy, you know, so I was all in on the line. And then the Hollywood constriction last year. And then the movie was born, finished, completely uploaded on January 15th this year in the middle of the LA fires. So
Mm,
COVID, plague, obviously destruction, you know, of our industry economy with the strikes, and then the inferno. It feels like biblical, right? So the moral of the story is, if something wants to survive, it will. And if you think things are broken, sometimes your bones heal better after they break. And
mm.
sometimes we need to understand that we are, as human beings, beings of recovery. We know how to recover, and this film really for me is a touchstone in my life. My wife Sarah, my lovely wife, designed the poster, so having that connection, every frame of this I look at, I'm proud of. You know, despite the struggle, it became the fertilizer and the soul of my soil. You know?
Yeah, I love your positivity. That's such a great way to look at it because I feel like most people wouldn't.
Yeah,
And I think that you speak life into your work and other people's work as well, and just like how you keep harping on how powerful cinema is, because I really believe that too.
yeah.
Um, and I think your film is obviously a great example of that. And so one of my last questions is, for anybody that comes across this or that watches this that wants to work in film, that wants to work in a creative space, but maybe doesn't feel like they don't know how to start or, what to do, what advice would you give to people?
I think the most important advice I would give is what my father taught me, which was, always go to the root, which is the idea. Learning to, what are the ideas that you're most passionate about, that you're willing to go all in for, that's yours, that defines your soul, that defines your life, that defines your imagination. It's the first step, and the most important step is, giving yourself time to grow as a human being, and to be able to find the ideas that you're most passionate about. That if you want to work in the visual or audio visual space, I think it's finding those films like E.T., for example. I've studied E.T. my whole life. I'll watch it. My beautiful daughter will be watching it when she's old enough. We're going to always have that conversation. It's identifying the works of art that have inspired you to become an artist, studying them, writing questions about them, researching them. This is the academia part that I love, of just like really finding new ways to interpret old masters, right? Like you can, and then finding an idea. And I believe the most important thing is the cheapest thing, which is the writing, which is you need a pen and a paper or a laptop or your iPhone's notes app or whatever device. I mean, right now everybody has a writing tool. Even the homeless guy down the street that I just passed by was texting. So the reality is, learning to articulate is the number one stage of any artwork. So whether if you're a painter, then you're articulating with color and light. If you're a musician, it's with wind and string and brass or drum, right? With cinema, it's with audio visual motion pictures. But if you wanted to be a narrative fiction filmmaker, which is what I am, you know, screenwriting and directing is yin and yang. It's both part of the same thing. So it's all there in front of you is what I'm saying. There's no magic trick. There's no book you have to buy. What you have to do is go to the roots of the places that you love you know, and study the masters that you're inspired by. Like for me, Martin Scorsese, you know, he's the son of immigrants. Like everything he's done in my life was a mirror. Like he's always been the master I never met, but the master that nourished me just like my father did. And so I feel like the most important thing you can do is find the art and what is it that you want to communicate and work on becoming a good storyteller. Just tell a story to your friend over coffee. Hey, I got this idea. And you will see your imagination, your soul, and your all the work you've done in elementary school, junior high, high school will all coalesce, and you'll start to become a better storyteller with each telling. That's what I do normally. I have a couple of good friends who will not, you know, bat an eye to tell me like, hey, that's an awful idea, and here's why.
Yeah.
And so that sharing, telling a story is the most important agency all of us have that nobody can take from us. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, white, black, Armenian, Korean, Argentinian, Apache, Lakota, none of that matters. What matters is that we find communion. Like I haven't met you, but I feel like you're a long lost friend, right? Because we're connected over images and we're
Yeah.
connected for a love of story. And so I feel like the most important thing is to really define what you want to do. If you want to be a cinematographer, you know, there's so many ways to do that. Now, more than ever, information is free, not when we were in analog zone, right? So there's so much you can do. And there's so much of these podcasts, like your lovely podcast, you know, you go deep into the heart of things. But the most important thing is having the courage to sit, look at yourself in the mirror and say, what am I most passionate about? And make that list. And don't make a list of 20 things, make a list of 5 things, and out of those 5, pick one and devote that year to making that happen. And you can shoot a film now on an iPhone. You know, you can edit it, you know, on so many different types of software. So the point is, it's not about the technology. The technology is boring. It's getting cheaper and cheaper by the day. What's not boring, what's not common is your voice. What makes you you and not anybody else? And that's the fight I'm fighting, you know. It's like what Charles Bukowski said when I read in high school, you know, and I talked about this with my dad. He said, do you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to have the second half of that sentence in my life. I was like, I have to remember who I am, and I'm not going to sell out to anybody. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to struggle. But if I fail, I want to fail on my terms, not on anybody else's, you know?
That's great advice. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Tiffany. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to wrap up this interview. I definitely don't want to keep you on for too long. So thank you
No,
so
no,
much.
feel free. If there's anything else you want to talk about, and I'm all ears.
Yeah, so just lastly, I wanted to ask you where people can follow you so that they can keep up with your projects and, you know, follow along with Die Like a Man.
Absolutely. It's at Eric Nazarian, my first and last name on Instagram, and then at Die Like a Man Official. Every day we have new posts and new updates, and we're going to be doing a theatrical that I'm self-releasing for 1 week on April 18th to the 24th at 2 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. at one of the oldest movie palaces in Hollywood in downtown LA called the $1 Million Theater. And that's going to be really awesome. I want to create like really community events. We'll have a ton of Q&As. The actors will come and go, and we just want to build a community feeling in the space. And then it drops on Apple iTunes on April 25th, VOD.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Many blessings, and looking forward to meeting you one of these days.
I know. I hope to meet you as well. Thank you so much.
Have a blessed weekend. Thank you.
Hey, you too.